Hi, and welcome back to Rick's Room. Now, when I was working as a trade journalist in New York, the best part of my job was sitting down and having conversations with experienced executives, people I knew what they were talking about. That's why I set this up, Rick's Room, so we can have those kind of conversations in a more relaxed atmosphere. Now, in the room today, I've got a man I think many of you may know, Michael Harris. Now, Michael, you're a Blackfin consultant, but you also have other interests. You own Genic Asset Management Consulting. Thank you for being with me in the room today.
Thanks, Rick. I appreciate it. How you doing, my friend?
I'm good, and I'll be honest with you. When I found out you were going to be available, I didn't plan anything to talk to you about. I mean, there's so much going on right now. I knew we'd come up with something. What's been on your mind?
We just hit the nail on the head, Rick. I thought about a conversation we had recently when we were kind of talking about all that's going on in the world right now, particularly in our country, and all the change. And you said, that might be a good thing to talk about. And I was thinking about it, Rick, and I said, Rick's absolutely right. I think that's exactly what we should talk about is change management and how do you react to change as leaders, as partners. I think it's very important to be able to manage through these types of scenarios where there's a lot of uncertainty going on in the business world.
Well, you're right, Mike. If I was going to write a story, if I was going to write a newspaper article about change, you'd be one of the first guys I'd call. But so much is changing so quickly in our environment now. God, how do you even decide where to start?
It's a good point. It's something there was something I wrote down that you had mentioned. You use the term decision making through uncertainty, and I think that really defines it. I think a lot of the things you have to be flexible, you have to be pliable, you have to look for other resources other than yourself to help you manage through uncertainty. And there's many tools that you can use, and so we can talk about some of those tools today. Those tools would include, how you manage your clients, how you manage your products and services, how do you manage your efficiency, those types of things, and when's the best time to do it.
No, I like that. And all those things have to be considered, so many more. When you go into a company that is considering change, do you have a framework or a process that you use? How do you go about helping them make sure they don't leave out a critical element?
So a couple of thoughts. One is if you're dealing with two types of scenarios. One is if somebody's looking at a specific aspect of their production or their service, you would look at that specifically, and then obviously look at the ancillary outlying things around it that may affect or have an effect on those processes. And so, therefore, you're very myopic in looking at that process, and looking at outliers, looking at standard deviations and what they're doing, and hopefully create process improvements. But if somebody comes and says, "Hey, I want you to look at everything over, let's just look under the hood," so to speak, using that term, there's all sorts of things you can look at. You're looking at, as I mentioned, looking at technology and automation, the way you're using those tools across your entire lines of business, looking at maybe, modifications of your products and services. You think about back in the pandemic where we were doing those types of things and looking at, things were slower, we're losing revenue, or our revenue is down. We looked at, well, how do we do that? There's a couple of things you can do. One is you can change or modify your existing product services to be applicable to a larger potential customer audience. You can introduce new products and services, again, to bring in a larger customer audience and therefore offset any type of losses you had because business is down. But also, I'm a firm believer, change management is good at any time. And particularly in times of uncertainty or maybe things are slower, when you have the ability to really peel back the onion and take a look at the way you're doing things, and having the ability to affect that as a leader and embrace it and obviously implement it.
It's got to be a huge blind spot for so many companies. They get successful using a certain process or using a certain tool, staffed a certain way. Um, they may not even have an opportunity to look at that and see if they could do something better unless they're forced to change. Now,
Now yeah, I'm sorry, Rick, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, I was just going to say change on your own, though, is really challenging. So before I let you go, I do want to move into that part where we talk about how do you work with a consultant? How do you find somebody, you
Yeah.
need some help. How do you get help? Where do you go?
No, it's a really, really important point in the sense that, For example, at Blackfin Group, we're fortunate enough to a lot of the partners have run companies. We have experiences as operational leaders. And so we can take that experience into our consulting experiences and say, listen, I've been in your seat even when I was doing it, and I'm a process manager, change management person, process improvement person. I still had trouble seeing the forest for the trees. I had trouble looking from the outside and looking in and seeing where my risks were. So it's really important for us to go in there and say, listen, been there, done that. Let us help you, and let's talk this through as a partner, and being able to open, everybody's eyes and learn from each other about ways we can help each other.
No, I like that very much. Very much. I know Keith Kemp and the team you guys have put together and the work you've done has been really impressive over the last couple of years. But when you go into a company, when you're talking to somebody that realizes they have to change, that's got to be an overwhelming kind of sensation for them. How do you talk them off the ledge? How do you work them through that initial scoping out of the project and understanding what they need to do?
I think the most important thing is, again, as I mentioned just earlier, is treat them as a partner and collaborate with them as you do fact finding and learn more about where their risk is. And then, so it's a mutual fact finding mission where you're mutually looking under the hood, using that term again, to be able to see where that risk is. And both of you and the company that you're working with, being able to find that together and discover it together and own it together. So from that perspective, you're not going into a company and saying, listen, this is where your problems are. You go into a company and say, hey, let's work together and figure out where the issues are, and let's work together to find remedies, and more importantly, to find control measures that we can put in place so you don't have that risk again.
No, I like that very much. Are there keys? Are there keys to success that you walk into one of those engagements with when you're getting ready to have that new partnership with a company that knows they need to change? What's top of mind for you as you get into that engagement?
This now sound cliche, but the number one thing is just listen. Is you can go in and talk about all your experiences and et cetera, but the most important thing is going in and just listening and hearing what they have to say. You can hear where their pain points are by the way they discuss their issues and the way they talk, and being able to listen and being able to absorb that and being able to articulate back to them. Again, some classic phrasing, classic conversational pieces would be, okay, what I heard you say was, and making sure you have ownership from them about what you just heard to make sure you're going down the right path. And again, that creates the partnership. I keep going back to that. That creates the partnership in fact finding mission about helping them solve where their risks are.
All right. I like that. Now, Mike, we're just two guys sitting in the room, right? Just the two of us. So talk to me about some of the horror things you've seen, the real mistakes people make when it comes to change management. You don't have to mention any company names or executives, but we've all made mistakes, and I'm sure you've seen some big ones.
I wouldn't say horror show or huge mistakes, but I would say there's some commonalities. And I think we touched on this a little bit in our last conversation is, kind of three facets. Again, making sure that leadership in the company is buying into, what you're offering them from a process improvement perspective, your experience, your expertise. But the other is making sure that leadership portrays that or communicates that to the team so they have the buy-in as well, and working with the teams arm in arm. And lastly, most importantly, is you're going to go and provide and implement a set of control measures that make sure that you don't have a deviation again from your best practices. And it's really, really important for leadership and the company as a whole to adhere to those control measures. And also, just as importantly, is reach out if they feel that those control measures are not working properly. And then you can revisit what you've done, because everything changes. Again, we're talking about change management, so nothing's finite. And it's important to understand that, you may go into an organization and spend a month with them and talking through all these different aspects of their organization, their process, the way they use technology, the way they communicate, the way the organization is structured, et cetera. And you may have change management as you're doing it. Things may disrupt. Somebody leaves, somebody's promoted, somebody gets a new role. And so you have to be able to roll with that. And again, work with that, and as you build out the infrastructure for your controls at the end of the process, is that understanding that those are going to change as well, and it's an evolving mechanism.
I see why people like to call you in to work with them, Mike.
Mhm.
Now, one of the superpowers humans have is that we have the ability to ignore things we don't want to face. So, what would you say to an executive that thinks change isn't important now?
I would say have historically been guilty of that. I'm a huge procrastinator. It's really important to humanize these types of conversations. It's interesting. Looking at uh, a product or a tool that we use called design thinking. My background is as a Six Sigma for using the IMAIC process, which is much more, again, standard deviation, looking at gap analysis, etc. But design thinking really humanizes and looking at the human approach to a company or an organization. And as I get more involved with design thinking, it reminds me to really understand your customer's motivation as a human, why they're there, why it's important to them, why they're reaching out to you and spending the time with you, and what makes them tick, so to speak. So from that perspective, I think it's really important to be able to have that commonality. And again, I go back to the same term, partnership. They understand you're working with them. You're not dictating to them. You're not, necessarily just consulting with them. You're partnering with them to help them out. And again, this all may sound cliche or contrived, but I've found over the course of the years that it's really, really important.
It doesn't sound contrived to me at all. It sounds like exactly what a lot of business executives need. Mike Harris, he's a managing director at Blackfin. He owns his own company, Genic Asset Management and Consulting, and you do a bunch of other things. Mike, I got to have you back in the room soon. Thank you so much for being here.
Rick, it's always a pleasure. Love you, brother, and let's talk soon.
Good.